Okay? It's a chance for me to introduce Ray Johnston to you. And Ray is unique to me in that sometimes when people begin to experience success, just think about the people that you've worked with, and as they began to experience success, sometimes they changed. They got a little bit of tough to get around. They began to act like they were maybe different or better, and I like to say that they acted like they no longer used deodorant, they no longer needed it, and they thought they stopped stinking, and Ray he's kept stinking all along, actually, and so, but sometimes he's in my arena. When you get some books written and you get a church that's well over 10,000 people, that kind of stuff begins to sometimes swell people's head. He has the largest church north of Los Angeles, I just learned in the last service. I knew it was big, but I didn't know how big. And he has become not only a friend to me, but a friend to our church. And I can't tell you what an encouragement he has been. And when his church was actually the one that inspired us to begin to think about going all the way. We were always going to give away a big percentage of our last campaign, but it was his church, and it was the only church at the time that I knew of that had ever done a 50-50 campaign. And so I contacted Ray and said, Ray, would you come down away from your busy schedule and come and join us? And he said, absolutely. So I want you to give a huge Westgate welcome to Ray Johnston.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, first of all, it is really great to be here. I want to start by actually saying this. Would you reach into your programs and grab out this message outline? It'll be a lot easier to follow. I also want to say this. Congratulations on doing a 50-50 campaign. I don't know if you're aware of it. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, we came up with this wild idea, felt like God was telling us to do a capital campaign, but to give half of the money away to 44 different projects around the world. And everybody I know called and said to me, you're nuts. You can't do this. It won't work. People won't give. Major Christian leaders from around the nation called me and said, what are you thinking? And I said, well, Steve Clifford's going to do one, so what, you know. And so literally, I had people that you know their names call me and say, people will not give if you're going to take half of what they give and give it away to some need-beating project, okay? They'll give a lot of money, but only if it's to bricks and a church building. And the more of those conversations I had, I actually started thinking, this is not good. Because if that's how Christians are and churches are, we're going to be known as the people with nice buildings that don't care about the people that are needy. Would you agree with that? Which is kind of how we're known, isn't it? And I thought, that kind of stirred it up even more. Our campaign that everybody told me would be about half of what came in before, doubled above anything we'd ever seen. And so I want to congratulate you folks. I'm only aware of 3 churches that have done this. Our church, Francis Chan's church, and your church. And other than the 3 of us, no churches in America have done what you are about to do. And I want to congratulate you because I actually believe you are on the front page of what the future is going to be in American Christianity. And I just think it's an exciting time. And it's also not surprising because I think you have one of the most visionary leaders on the planet. And I don't know if you're aware of this. I get to know a lot of pastors. You have one of the best. If I were anywhere near this church, I'd quit my job to come here. You have a pastor that means what he says when he's on this stage and literally says that. So, way to go. And that takes care of the introduction Steve wrote for me. Now, if you've got your message notes out, I want to read you something. How many of you have kids? We're kids here? Okay, cool. Last week, I took my children to a restaurant. My 6-year-old son, who never does anything quietly, how many have one of these? Asked if he could say grace. As we bowed our heads, he said, in a voice that the entire restaurant could hear, God is good, God is great, and Lord, I thank you for this food, but I will thank you even more if Mom gets us all ice cream for dessert. And then he yelled out, and liberty and justice for all, amen. And this lady writes, along with laughter from the other customers nearby, I heard an elderly woman remark out loud, so my son heard it, kids today asking God for ice cream, why I never. Hearing this, my son burst into tears. And with tears streaming down his face, looked at me and said, Mommy, did I do it wrong? Is God mad at me? And she says, as I held him and assured him that God was certainly not mad at him, an elderly gentleman who heard the whole thing stood up and started slowly walking to our table. He leaned down and got real close to my son, who was still crying, and said, young man, I happen to know God. And I happen to know that God thought that was a terrific prayer. Really, my son said? And the old guy said, cross my heart. Then he nodded to the old lady who started the whole mess and said, this is great. Too bad she doesn't ask God for ice cream. Little ice cream can be good for the soul sometimes. Can I get an amen on that from some of you? I mean, and this lady says, naturally, at the end of this meal, I bought my son the biggest dish of ice cream they set it down in front of him. His eyes got real big, and then without a word, he got up, walked over, put it down in front of the lady and said, here, lady, ice cream's good for the soul sometimes. My soul's good already. If you would get your notes out, I want to speak tonight on how do you unleash the power of hope into your life so that your soul becomes in good shape. Now, let me ask you a quick question, okay? What is the opposite of hope? Discouragement. What is the number one emotion in America right now? Discouragement. What is the deadliest disease you could ever catch because it will wreck your life and ruin all of your relationships? It's discouragement. Discouragement is the match that lights the fuse that destroys everything. Every destroyed marriage started with discouragement. Everybody that ever quit a great job started because everybody that ever was serving God effectively and quit because they were discouraged. Discouragement, we call it, at my church, we have a definition. We say it is the anesthetic that the devil uses on a person just before he reaches in and carves out their heart. And I want to talk about tonight, I'm going to actually come out swinging. You're going to get a lot of content, so grab a pen and get ready to write this stuff down. But I want to talk about the problem of discouragement, the power of discouragement, and does God have a cure for it? Now, if you've got your notes out, okay, number one, just jot this in. The problem with discouragement is this. Every single person in the Bible that I can find had to bounce back from discouragement. And here's what I want to say. Watch this. Would you raise your hand if you've gotten discouraged in the last 30 days? Check it out. You gotta look around. Here's the deal. You and I will get down. People that stay down have their lives destroyed. And I have a list of things that people in the Bible had to bounce back from. And I want you to raise your hand as I read it if you've had to bounce back from it. Moses had to bounce back from failure. Anybody here? Okay, good. Moses had to bounce back from lack of encouragement by people that he was leading. Steve. John Mark was rejected by a Christian leader. Don't raise your hand on that. Nehemiah had discouragement with his circumstances. Anybody got that? Loss of a job, loss of a house, Peter. You know what Peter's main source of discouragement was? Himself. Peter goes, hey, Jesus, you know, those other disciples, they're basket cases, man. They're a bunch of wimps, bunch of pansies. He goes, you're going to the cross? You can count on me. How'd he do? Matter of fact, I want to try a little experiment. You teenagers, 18 years old. How old are you guys? Okay, good. Stay seated. If you're 18 years or under, stay seated. Everybody over that age, stand up, if you're able. Okay? Now, watch this, because a lot of times you all come into a church and you go, oh, everybody here is probably perfect except me. Okay? Watch this. You have to be honest. Sit down. If you were ever kicked out of school or a church event because of misbehavior, sit down. There goes your pastor, okay? Okay, wait. You sinners that just sat back down, stand back up. I'm gonna give you one more chance. Stand back up. Okay? Sit down. If you ever made out with one of the other youth group kids at a church retreat or school event, sit down. You're gonna have an interesting conversation later, Pastor. Sit down if you drank alcohol in high school. Sit down if you could not name the first 5 books of the Bible when you were in high school. Sit down. Sit down if when somebody said, every head bowed and both eyes closed, you peeked. Oh, wait. Stay standing. Look at this. Oh, stay standing. We have, I read a simple list of 5 sins and the entire church collapses except for one pathological liar. Can we have a round of applause for him? Would you raise your hand if you've ever gotten discouraged because of yourself? Watch this. Why did I say that? Why did I do that? Why did I do that? It's my number one source of discouragement for me is me. Okay? Next one is this. Jesus, discouragement with people. Joseph got down because of mistreatment from a dysfunctional family. Some of you know what that feels like, okay? That may get you down, but you can't let it keep you down, okay? Check this next one out. Elijah, he got down because he got criticized. I mean, and check it. I love Elijah. He takes on 400 prophets of Baal, no sweat, wipes them all out. Criticism from one woman, and he runs and hides in a cave. Okay? Unbelievable. Every single person in the Bible I can find had to bounce back from somebody. Hey, check this out. Lazarus, he had to bounce back from being dead. Okay? In other words, you are going to get down. You cannot afford to stay there. Does that make sense? And let me tell you why you can't afford to stay there. Write this in. The power of discouragement. And I want to give you 4 facts about discouragement. And here they are. Number 1 is this. Discouragement is a universal disease. We all get it. It's a universal. Number 2, it's a repeating disease. Would you agree you can catch discouragement more than one time? Absolutely. Number 3, and would you agree with this? It's a contagious disease. You can catch it from discouraging people you know. How many of you have people like in your life where you're going, I already know, if I'm with them, I'm going to be discouraged. Anybody know? How many of you, they're in-laws or outlaws or whatever you want to call them, okay? How many of you, it's Steve? No, I'm kidding. Discouragement is a universal, repeating, contagious, and here's the real problem. It is a deadly disease. It is a deadly disease. It will wreck your life, ruin your relationships. It can take down a marriage, take down a church, take down a career. If you get down and stay down, that is fatal. And if you would flip your outline over, I want to introduce you to a guy in the Bible that got down but didn't stay there. But let me give you the circumstances. Now, I got to warn you. Okay, look up here for a second, okay? This is going to be a 2-minute mini church history course right in the middle of the sermon. So we are now coming to the boring part of the sermon, and you thought that's what would just happen. And so I'm going to take you through a couple hundred years of church history in 2 minutes, but it's going to be boring. So what I want to do is I'm going to say this. Are you still with me occasionally? And you will say yes. Even if you checked out, wake up and say yes. I'm going to practice that. Are you still with me? Yes, okay, great. Now, for a couple hundred years, God's people, and check it out on your thing, were all in a united kingdom, okay? And they were united because they had 3 really great kings, okay? First, they had a king was named Saul, followed by King David, a great king, and then his son took over, King Solomon, okay? Now, in 931 BC, all 12 tribes are together, they're all united, and then they have a church split, sort of. It's a national church split, and they divide. Now, what did they divide over? Here's what they divided over: high taxes. How many of you in California would like to divide over that right now? Okay, I'm with you, okay? And so they split. 10 of the tribes go to the north, 2 of the tribes go to the south. The 10 tribes that go to the north form the nation of Israel. The 2 tribes that go to the south form the nation of Judah. Are you still with me? Okay, good. Now the 10 tribes that go to the north, their capital is in Samaria. Okay, this is important. 2 tribes that go to the south, this is really important, their capital is in Jerusalem. Okay, now what happens to each one of those 2 nations? The 10 tribes in the north, okay, the Assyrians in 722 BC invade. I mean, they slaughter everybody. They were vicious. I mean, Rambo on steroids with spears, and they wipe the entire thing out, okay? End of kingdom, never heard from again. Well, what happens to the 2 tribes in the south? Okay, look up here. Babylon's over here, Jerusalem's over there. One day, King Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, go wipe out Jerusalem. Take everybody captive, okay? So in 606 BC, the Babylonian army comes over. They knock the wall of protection down around Jerusalem. Then they invade the entire thing, but instead of slaughtering everybody, they handcuff them all, and they haul them all the way back over to Babylon. And they are in Babylon in a thing that the Bible calls the exile or the captivity. So in the Old Testament, from now on, forevermore, when you read the word exile or captivity, you know what they're talking about. They are there for how long? Anybody know? 70 long years, just like the prophet said. Okay, now y'all still with me? Yes. Good. Well, after 70 years, what happens? It's kind of a cool thing happens. The Babylonians go, hey, thanks for coming. Y'all been great. And then they go, want to go home? Go. And they go, sweet, or in Hebrew, whatever that is, okay? And they go back to Jerusalem in 3 waves. The first wave is led by a guy with a really cool name, Zerubbabel. Anybody here got a dog, cat, kid named Zerubbabel? And thanks. Okay. Zerubbabel leads the first wave. You want to read about that? Ezra 1-6. Okay. Now, when they arrive, they are supposed to rebuild the wall. They fail to get that done. And so they live for years and years and years, decades, in abject poverty and discouragement. It is a mess. So a second wave comes years later, led by a guy named Ezra. Ezra comes back and leads a second wave. And now, get this, it is 92 years later. For 92 years, they have failed to rebuild the wall of protection. For 92 years, they have been stuck in discouragement, stuck in despair. Folks, they're a mess. 92 years, they have been down and stayed down. And that's what's going on. There's a guy named Nehemiah. He's living over here in a town called Susa. His brothers go to visit Jerusalem. His brothers come back, and Nehemiah goes, hey, how's it going in Jerusalem? And his brothers go, man, not good, man. The wall's broken down. The gates are burned with fire. The people are in disgrace. The thing is a mess. And Nehemiah, who turns out to be one of the great leaders in history, gets down. And check this verse out. It's on the back of your note. Here's Nehemiah's response. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. And he stays that way for a while. And he gets discouraged and stays discouraged for a while. However, he then gets his eyes back on God, and that ignites his prayer life, and it ignites his faith, and he comes back out of discouragement. And look up here, would you? Because some of you have been discouraged for a long time, and you walked in here tonight, and God brought you here to hear this. Nehemiah finally got out of the rut of discouragement, and he starts a rise. And you know what happens is Nehemiah gets so encouraged, he moves to Jerusalem. He gathers the whole city and says, let's rebuild the wall. And they all look at him like, you're nuts. We can't do this. It's been 92 years of failure. And finally, Nehemiah stands up and says this verse. I'll give you the verse in a second, because there's a key verse. He says this verse to them, and you know what happens? Hope gets birthed in them. And they get so hot with hope that, check this out. Nehemiah chapter 6, it's on your outline. So the wall was rebuilt in how long? 52 days with the help of our God. Don't you love this? One guy with hope arrives on the scene, and check it out. They get a wall built in 52 days that people had been saying for 92 years couldn't happen. One guy with hope. Why is hope so important? I love what the psychologist said. I know a counselor who said, no matter what a disaster this couple is, he said, if I can just get a couple, any couple, no matter how bad they are, he said, if I can get any couple to have just 10% improvement, he said, I got them. He said, because when they get 10% improvement, then they get hope. And then here's a great phrase. And he said, and when somebody gets hope, anything's possible. When somebody gets hope, anything's possible. Nehemiah got hope, and anything was possible. If you get hope, anything's possible in your marriage. Anything's possible with your kids. Anything's possible in your church. Anything's possible in your business. Anything's possible in your finances. And anything's possible in your future if you have hope. So the million-dollar question is this: how do I get it? I got no clue, so let's close in prayer. No, Nehemiah, I want to give you a verse, and if you feel like I'm a little fired up about this, you have no idea, because I'm about to give you a verse that carried me through 2 years. I pastor a church in Sacramento area for people that don't like church. It's called Bayside. We almost named it Baywatch. We went with Bayside. That was probably a smart move. We built the church and met in a high school for a while, and it started growing. We said, man, we got to build a building. So we bought 36 acres on a major street in Granite Bay and started to go in to get building permits to build. And a little group of Granite Bay residents. Now, how many of you have been to Granite Bay? Okay, got through customs and everything. Granite Bay is like saying Beverly Hills, Sacramento. Granite Bay is so lily white, it's sickening. It's like 90-something% Caucasian. I mean, it's boring. It's the opposite of diverse. And we have some residents in Granite Bay that were not happy that our church was attracting people from the entire town, okay? And so they started mobilizing people to fight us off and get us out of Granite Bay. I actually met with a guy in my office, and this guy is a Christian and attends a local Presbyterian church. And he said to me, I said, why are you against the church? And he said, because your church attracts outsiders. And he said, nothing in Granite Bay should attract outsiders other than Folsom Lake. And I looked at him and I said, our church has never checked anybody's race before they walked in here. We've never checked anybody's address before walking in here. And I got to tell you, we're not starting now. I said, so bring it on. And I said, but we're Christians, so why don't we pray? So I prayed that we would attract people, and he prayed they'd stay away. And we, you know what, folks? We got sued. We got picketed. I arrived for worship services at Granite Bay High School. We had about 4,000 people at the high school. I arrived for worship services. There were anti-Bayside protesters picketing our worship services. Unbelievable. I mean, now, what are you supposed to do with your enemies, by the way? Yeah, shoot them. No, pray for them. The Bible says, love your enemies, okay? It was a cold morning. We sent them hot coffee and donuts all morning long. It started raining. We brought them umbrellas. It started raining harder. We said, hey, look, this anti-Bayside material you're passing out, we said, we promise we will put it in every church bulletin and give it out for you if you want to go home. It's freezing out here, okay? And we went through that whole thing. I would get up to speak. My stress level went off the chart. I would get up to speak, and 2 or 3 people, video cameras would start shining on me from opponents that snuck into our services that were videoing me looking for something to sue me over. I'd get up to preach, and Channel 3 and Channel 10 and Channel 13 and Channel 40 would be there, and I'd preach, go do an interview, preach, go do an interview, and then we started getting threatened, okay? And we'd have a threat level for me and my family. Okay, and occasionally one of the guys that worked for us would come up and he'd go, Ray, we got to put some people outside your house tonight. You'll see a car out there maybe there 2 or 3 days because the threat level's a little high right now. And it's just this private security company that we've got, or we got off-duty cops at Bayside that can just be spending the night outside your home protecting you and your family because you're getting threatened. And Steve, I'm sitting there going, they didn't tell us about this in seminary. Where was this course, you know? And where do you think my stress level went? Here, you know what, I hate to admit this. My fear level went up, my stress level went up, my discouragement index went And finally I went, I don't think God wants me living this way. You know, I found a verse in the Bible. Not only did it lower my fear level, and not only, this verse filled me with such confidence that when a lady said to me one day, it'll be a cold day in hell before you get a church built in our town. This verse played in my head. And it must be a cold day in hell because we've been meeting there for about 5 years right now. And you know what's interesting? I'm going to give you a verse. If you will memorize this and live it, you will never recover. And here it is. It's right in your outline. And it's just the first half of this verse. Nehemiah goes into this discouraged town and he says these words, "The God of heaven will give us success, and we, his servants, will arise and build." Got anything you need to build? Some of you are building a family. Some of you are building a business. Some of you are rebuilding your finances. Some of you are building a church. You're in the midst of building a capital campaign. You folks are in the midst of building what I think is one of the most exciting churches on the entire West Coast. You know what? This verse, you know what I did? I put this verse on my mirror. I put it in the shower. I put it everywhere. I would get up in the morning. You know what I'd do? I'd go, "The God of heaven will give us success. We as servants will arise and build." I go to comb my hair, which doesn't take much time. I would go, "The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will arise and build." This lady says to me, "It'll be a cold day in hell." You know what plays in my head? The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will arise and build. Bring it on, babe. We got God on our side. And I didn't say that, but I thought all that stuff internally. I want you to say this verse out loud with me. You ready? "The God of heaven will give us success. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build." There is no way, if you memorize that, get it in your soul, and live it, that you can ever stay down. Because that verse gives you 4 things, and here they are. Jot them in, and this will lift you to levels or never. Number 1 is this. The God of heaven, that's being God-centered. That is being God-centered, okay? Nehemiah walks in, and these people are failure-centered, or lack of resource-centered, or past-centered. They're centered on anything but God. Nehemiah walks in and says, "Get your eyes off of your circumstances and back onto God." He says, "The God of heaven," and then I love this, he says, "will give us success." He's faith-focused. He's faith-focused. I spend most of my life being fear-focused. Anybody else in here? If I have a cough, I go, "Oh, it's probably the early stages of leukemia," you know? If I get, a bump on my hand or something, I go, "Oh man, I'll bet it's cancer. I'm done now," you know? Is anybody else wired like this? I mean, that's just me, okay? You're pointing at her. Okay? I'm sure that's very encouraging to her. Now you're hugging her to try to make, too late. You know what? And I love this because Nehemiah says, Nehemiah walks in the city and says, "We are done being failure-focused. We are done being fear-focused. We are going to be faith-focused. The God of heaven will give us success." The best way to describe it is by telling you this story, because if this happened to you, it would make all the difference, okay? Diane Disney obviously had a famous dad named Walt. And she said he was like a normal dad. He drove me to school. She said he helped me with homework. She goes, "Matter of fact, when I was in kindergarten, I had no clue who he was. I had no clue." And she said, "But the first day of kindergarten, I found out." She goes, "Because I'm sitting in the middle of kindergarten. You know those desks you always sat at?" She goes, "Everybody's introducing their name. My name's Sally Smith. My name's John Brown." And she goes, it gets to me, and she goes, "My name's Diane Disney." And she said, when I said the word Diane Disney, the whole class went crazy. Oh, man. She calmed down. She goes, she said, "I started to get shook up. I thought they were making fun of me." And the teacher said, honey, whoa, what was your name again?" "My name's Diane Disney." The whole class goes crazy again. And she goes, "Calm down." And she goes, "I started to get all teary-eyed and I started to cry." And the teacher said, "Don't cry. Nobody's making fun of you." She said, "I think I can explain why." She said, "Honey, what's your father's name?" She goes, "My father's name's Walter." Wow, the class goes crazy again. And she goes, "No." She goes, "Honey, the class isn't making fun of you. They're excited for you and themselves." And she said, "They're excited for you because," they said, "your dad is Walt Disney." She said, "Yeah, I know. My dad's Walter Disney." She said, No. Your dad's Walt Disney. Disneyland, Disney. Mickey Mouse, Disney. The Musketeer Club, Disney. Goofy, Disney. Your dad is Walt Disney. Disneyland is yours. She goes, I had no idea. I got home, she said, I got home that day. I walked up. She said, my dad was sitting in an overstuffed chair reading a newspaper. She said, I walked up, I grabbed his newspaper out of his hands, I put my little hands on my little hips and stared him right, and she said, I looked right at him and said, you never told me you were Walt Disney. And she says, I walked around in a daze for a month, stunned by who my father was. Shouldn't that be us? We ought to be walking around not depressed by the economy or my 401k is a 401k mart or I'm gonna lose this or all this. We ought to be walking around. That's the whole city of Jerusalem, okay? Years of failure, years of being down. And the only way out of that kind of discouragement is to get my eyes off of my circumstances and back onto God and to walk around stunned by who our Father is. Does that make sense? And God brought some of you here tonight to say, you know what? Your real problem is not the economy, not your lack of a job, not the loss of a house. Your problem is not your wife. Your problem is not your husband. Some of you going, oh, wait a minute now. Your problem's not your circumstances. Our problems only multiply when our eyes get on our circumstances instead of on God where they belong in the first place. Does that make sense? The only way out of discouragement is to get our eyes off of our circumstance and back onto God. Now, he doesn't stop there. He says, the God of heaven will give us success. And then I love it. These two go together. And he says, and we, his, what's the next word? Servants. Okay, write this down. They are servant-hearted. They are servant-hearted. We, his servants, and I love this, will arise and build. They are future-oriented. They are future. He says, we his servants will arise and build. Now, would you circle the word right on the right-hand side of your notes? If you're taking notes, okay, circle the word servants. We as servants, and then it says, will arise and build. Circle the word build and hook those two together because I want to say this. The only people who build great things for the future are people who serve. The only people that get anything great done in the future are people that serve. And I have to tell you, we are excited. Our churches, we swap resources. We spend time together. Steve and I go to Africa together. We do Thrive together. We did Thrive down here together. We do a lot of stuff. It's kind of like having a sister church in the Bay Area. And I am thrilled about that because this, to me, is about the most depressing thing I've seen in a long time. This is the cover of last year's Newsweek magazine. The decline and fall of Christian America. And you open this thing up and it basically says this: the influence of Jesus Christ and Christians and Christianity in America is at an all-time low and it's falling fast. Is that about the worst thing you could ever think of? And you know what's interesting is, by the way, this is true, isn't it? And part of what is, you know what? And I know people that read this and went, oh, all hope's lost, our country's gone that way, whine, all that kind of stuff. To me, this is like a challenge. The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will arise. Wouldn't it be great to live in such a way that in about 10 years they had to do another cover of Newsweek magazine called The Return of Christianity in America? How is that going to happen? It is, go ahead and applaud. I'm fired up. How is that going to happen? It will only happen as God's people say this verse. We, his servants, will get up and build something with our lives. And I have to tell you folks, maybe the best way to tell you is to tell you some of the stuff that people in our church have done to put this work. We as servants, every church, look up here, would you? Okay, you got a phenomenal pastor, but thinking that he can do it alone would be like thinking that the coach of the 49ers, Singletary, can go out and play a game by himself. He needs an entire team rallied behind him. And I have that at my church. we launched this church a few years ago. We actually launched it 15 years ago. We had 26 people and a dog at our first service. And right now, this weekend, there will be 12 Bayside churches meeting in our region, and the attendance at that'll be somewhere north of about 15,000. We've had people become Christians every single week in every single service for about the last decade. I have never seen anything like it. I have seen more people meet Christ, more lives transformed, more stuff happen than I could ever imagine. God's doing the same kind of stuff there that he's doing here. And I tell you what, though, it's because we have a group of people at our church, just like you, who made a decision that we, his servants, notice it doesn't say we, his spectators, we, his servants, will actually get up and build something with our lives. And we have people in our church. We did a capital campaign like you guys are doing. You're doing a 50-50 campaign. How long is it? 3 years. 3 years? We did a 3-year campaign, asked people to give to that. Well, you know what's a bummer about that? I mean, I'm a pastor, and this is embarrassing to admit. I started talking to our people, and I said, I'm not asking you to give like extra. I'm asking you to give a genuine sacrifice. And I said to some of our business guys, if this doesn't represent a genuine sacrifice, don't give. Don't even. In other words, and then but God said to my wife and I, if you don't do this, don't you dare ask your people to sacrifice. And God said to me, I read the Old Testament where David raised money to build a temple. And God said to David, you have to go first and you got to go public. And my wife and I so we're praying, going, God, okay, what do you want to give through us? We start praying about it. And some of you will get this. For my wife and I to agree on anything is a miracle, okay? And so we start talking about this, and we pray, and we're going, okay, we're not giving until we agree. Like, this is a genuine sacrifice miracle, okay? And God kept upping the number, upping the number, upping the number. Finally, I had to stand up in front of our church and say, look, and I'm your basic pastor. I had to say, God is leading Carol and I to give $60,000 over 3 years above what we tithe to this campaign. And that's exactly what David did in the Old Testament. And then David stood up and said, all right, who's with me? And I felt like I had to do that. And then the stories started rolling in. We had this really, I wish he was here, man. He's a riot. This guy's got 2 teenage kids. He comes up after the service 2 weeks later, and he goes, man, let me tell you what happened to my family. He goes, we had a family meeting to decide if we're going to give or not. And he said, I started it by saying, hey, our month and money end at the same time. How many of you know what this is like? And he said, so I don't think we can participate in this campaign. And he said, my teenage daughter at the table goes, what do you mean we can't participate? She goes, what if we did what Pastor Ray said? What if we sacrificed? And he's like, well, what do you mean, hon? She goes, what if I gave up my cell phone? I know. Dude's going, let's get a little personal. She goes, what if I gave up my cell phone? Dad goes, honey, that would probably pay for the whole church building, just that. She goes, no. She threw it on the table, and she goes, take it away for 3 years. I'm cool. She goes, what would that be over 3 years? They figured out, and then she goes, well, what about you guys? And they were going, well, we're getting ready to buy or lease a new car. She goes, well, how much is that a month? Well, he goes, it's about, such and such a month. She goes, well, write that down. She goes, what's that times 12? What's that times 3 years? What's a lot of money over 3 years? Why don't we delay buying a car for 3 years? And they go, okay. And this guy tells me, he goes, our family is pledging, and he handed me the card, $18,000 over the next 3 years, and we didn't even think we could participate. And he looked at me and he said, just because we're giving up a few things that the rest of the world never had anyway. Is that unbelievable? But that's not my favorite story. This couple who sat about where you guys are, okay, and both of them kind of a wild background, and I saw you sit down earlier when I was asking those questions. This couple had a wild background. They had become a Christian about 6 months before this, okay? And so they're both in church, and it's kind of a neat deal. And they come up to me after the service, and they go, we got it. We're going to give to the campaign over 3 years, and you know how we're doing it? We are going to give up drinking and smoking for 3 years. And we're going to give all of our cigarette and alcohol money to build a church because we think that's probably better. What do you think, okay? And so they do that. That's not my favorite, though. My favorite is this right here. This is like, and this is the real deal. My secretary comes into my office, and this stuff's gonna start happening. Because folks, we had people give boats, cars, trailers, bikes, jewelry, stock, houses, land. I mean, we had stuff. It just started pouring in. We finally got a separate office to handle all that stuff. Okay, and I was amazing. People gave all that stuff and 7 Chuck E. Cheese tokens. But my favorite was this. I'm in my office, and it's like the last week of the campaign, and my secretary Cindy, who's like got a tremendous sense of humor, comes in and she's crying. She goes, and I go, Cindy, what's wrong? She goes, you're not gonna believe this. This is the best thing that's ever happened. And she drops this gigantic brown paper sack on my desk. And when she drops it there, it's like, and it's filled with like tons of coins in it, okay? And I open it up. On the top of it is a bunch of crumpled up dollar bills. And on the top of that, folded up, is this. And I open this up, and she's crying. She goes, this is incredible. And I open it up, and it says, Dear Pastor Ray, we really, 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 really wanted to go to Disneyland. But my brother and I decided a new church would be better. Here is all our money. Courtney and Micah, age 5, age 7. I'm crying at my desk. We call our staff, and they're crying at their desk. And I thought, I got to show this to the church the next weekend. So I PowerPointed this, and I threw it up in front of our church. And I said, this is unbelievable. I brought the sack in, set it down, and I read this. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. You know what, folks? I actually believe this. You can sit there and go, I don't like messages like this. I'm going to find a cheaper church to go to. And there are churches. There are cheaper churches you could go to. There are churches in this region and my area that will not call you to sacrifice and not call you to live for God and not call you to serve God and not call you to put God first. And, they'll rewrite that verse to say, we, his special people, will sit and spectate, okay? They will not call you to this kind of stuff, and you will arrive in heaven, and God will look at you and say, not well done, but what were you thinking? And I thought, people in my church have got to see this. And I showed it to them. And you know what's neat about this? I believe this. The God of heaven will give us success. We as servants will arise and build. This is a God thing. And when you start honoring God, the Bible says he will honor you. And if that's for me, tell him I'm busy. When you start, I'm going to say this again. When you start honoring God, he will honor you. And when my wife and I made that pledge, and we announced that to our church, we have 4 kids in college starting in September at the same time. And I was sitting there going, I do not know how this is going to happen. And 3 days later, I'm on the board of Azusa Pacific University, and 3 days later, I was right after that deal, and I'm going, man, our kids are going to no college, they're going to be unemployed, it's going to be because of me giving all this money away. And I'm having a conversation with the president of Azusa Pacific, and I go to the Dodger game afterwards because I'm a Dodger fan. I'm sorry. Oh, good, another Christian. And we go to the Dodger game, and we walk out of the Dodger game at night. They lost, and oh, the grace in the room. And we walk out, and we're standing in the parking lot of Dodger Stadium, which is kind of like Mecca to me anyway. And he goes, hey, where are your kids going to go to college? And I said, well, Azusa's kind of expensive, and I said, 3 days ago, I pretty much flushed the future down the tube. And I kind of told him what happened. He goes, don't you know? And I go, what? He goes, you're on the board. I go, yeah. He goes, you don't know? I go, what? He goes, your kids get an automatic 50% tuition discount because you're on our board. If you add up what half of tuition is, that is like 3 times what I had just pledged. And it took God 3 days to give it all back. And when I showed our church this, we really wanted to go to Disneyland. As God would have it, at the 11:30 service, a visiting executive from Disney was in our worship service. And Monday morning, he calls my secretary, Cindy, who, of course, knew all about this. and they have a long conversation. And that visiting executive from Disney scholarshiped these two kids and their entire family, get this, not just into Disneyland, but into Disneyland for an entire week. And not just for an entire week did they get to go to Disneyland, but they stayed in the Disneyland Hotel for free for an entire week, okay? And now these two kids are running around town going, what else can we give away? And I want to close by saying this. You honor God, He will honor you. The God of heaven will give us success. We, His servants, will arise and build. Why would you want to live any other way? God bless you, folks. Thanks, man. Love you.